He was not barking because he wanted out. He was guarding something the world had forgotten. By the time the night crew at Cedar Run Animal Shelter heard the first sound, the rain had already turned the back lot into a field of black puddles, and the old chain link runs behind the building were rattling in the wind like loose bones. It was just past midnight in Southern Virginia, 38 degrees, cold enough for breath to fog under the yellow security lights, and for every drop of water sliding off the roof to sound heavier than it was. Maggie Turner, the shelter manager, had been locking the front office when she heard it again. Not a howl, not a whimper, a slow scrape of metal against concrete. She froze with one hand on the deadbolt, listening through the hum of the soda machine and the distant bark of dogs settling for the night. There it came again, softer now, somewhere beyond the laundry room, past the storage shed, out where no animal had been housed in years. Most people would have called animal control and waited inside where it was warm. Maggie was not most people. She pulled on her raincoat, grabbed a flashlight from the desk drawer, and stepped into the storm. The beam shook slightly in her hand as she crossed the gravel, her boots sinking half an inch into mud. The old shelter wing sat behind the main kennel like a bad memory, a row of rusted cages under a sagging tin roof, boarded up after a flood damaged it 5 years earlier. No one used it. No one checked it unless a storm blew loose trash into the runs. Maggie lifted the flashlight. For a moment, there was only rain, fence wire, and the silver shimmer of standing water. Then two eyes opened in the dark. They were pale amber, steady and exhausted, watching her from the last run on the left. Maggie stopped breathing. Inside the cage stood a German shepherd, but not like any she had seen come through Cedar Run. His coat was white beneath the mud, a ghostly white, thick and weather-matted, clinging to a body too lean for his size. His ears stood high, torn slightly at the edges by old wear, and his paws were planted with the strange discipline of a dog that still remembered commands even after the world stopped giving them. Around his neck hung a metal tag, dark with grime, knocking softly against a frayed tactical collar each time he shifted his weight. Maggie took one slow step forward. The dog did not lunge. He did not bare his teeth. He lowered his head just enough to show he understood danger, then moved sideways to block the rear corner of the cage. That was when Maggie saw the backpack. It lay behind him, half tucked beneath a rotted wooden pallet, olive drab, soaked through, one strap chewed and stiff with age. The white K9 placed himself between her and the bag as if it were a child sleeping behind him. "Easy, sweetheart," Maggie whispered, though her voice trembled on the last word. "I'm not here to take anything." The dog's eyes never left her face. Rain tapped the tin roof. Somewhere in the main building, another dog barked once and fell silent. Maggie tried the cage door. Locked. Not jammed. Not blown shut. Locked with a newer padlock than the rest of the run, silver against rust, clean enough to make her stomach tighten. Someone had put him there. Not years ago. Not by accident. Her flashlight slid over the concrete floor. No bowl. No blanket. No sign that anyone meant for him to be found. Only the dog, the backpack, and the tag swinging faintly under his throat like the last word of a prayer. Maggie backed away and radioed Ben, the overnight volunteer, but her eyes stayed on the K9. He stood so still that for a second she wondered if he was holding himself upright by will alone. A gust of wind pushed rain under the roof, and his body shivered once, hard, before he forced himself steady again. That small act nearly broke her. Not the mud, not the locked door, the pride. He was suffering, but he refused to look helpless. Ben arrived in a hooded sweatshirt, carrying bolt cutters and an old wool blanket from the intake room. "Where did he come from?" he asked. Maggie shook her head. "I don't know." Ben raised the cutters, but the second metal clinked against the lock. The K9 stepped forward. Not wild, not vicious, controlled. His chest rose. His ears angled sharp. A low warning rumbled in him, not loud enough to scare the night, just enough to say, "Do not cross this line." Ben lowered the cutters. "That's not a stray," he murmured. Maggie looked at the collar again. Beneath the mud, she could see the faint outline of block letters pressed into the tag, but the grime was too thick to read. "No," she said softly. "That dog belonged to somebody." The K9 blinked slowly, as if the sentence reached a place inside him no hand had touched in a long time. Then, from behind the main building, headlights swept across the rain. A black pickup had pulled into the service lot, its engine rumbling low. Maggie frowned. No appointments came at midnight. The driver's door opened, and a tall black man stepped out wearing a faded Marine Corps field jacket, his posture straight even in the storm, his boots moving across the gravel with quiet purpose. He had come to repair a broken fence at first light, but the storm had brought him early. Staff Sergeant Isaiah Brooks paused when he saw the white K9 behind the bars. The dog saw him too, and for the first time all night, the animal's guarded face changed. His ears lifted, his trembling stopped. Then the K9 sat down in the flooded cage, straight-backed and silent, like a soldier waiting for an order he had been holding in his heart for years. Isaiah Brooks did not move at first. Rain ran from the brim of his cap, down the hard lines of his face, and disappeared into the collar of his field jacket. But he stood there as if the cold had forgotten him. Maggie watched him from beside the rusted kennel door, one hand still wrapped around the flashlight, the other pressed against her ribs, as though she could keep her heart from climbing out. The white K9 remained seated inside the flooded cage, shoulders high, eyes fixed on Isaiah with an attention too deliberate to be fear. It was recognition without comfort, obedience without surrender. Ben whispered, "You know him?" Isaiah did not answer right away. His gaze had found the dog's collar, the stained tactical weave, the dull metal tag swinging beneath the throat, the posture that did not belong to a shelter stray. His jaw tightened. "I know what he is," he said softly. His voice was low, careful, carrying the kind of restraint that came from years of giving orders only when lives depended on them. Maggie stepped closer. "We found him locked in there. No food, no water, nothing. He will not let us near the bag." Isaiah looked past the dog. The olive-drab backpack lay in the corner, soaked and half-hidden, guarded by those white shoulders as if the whole night had narrowed down to that one ruined piece of canvas. The old lights flickered above them. Somewhere beyond the fence, traffic hissed along the county road, distant and indifferent. "How long has he been back here?" Isaiah asked. Maggie shook her head, shame moving across her face, though none of this was hers to carry. "We do not know. That wing has been closed for years. We only came out because we heard him scraping the door." Ben lifted the bolt cutters again, then hesitated when the dog's eyes slid toward him. "He does not want us touching the lock." Isaiah raised one hand, not toward the dog, but toward Ben. "Stop." The gesture was small. The K9 obeyed it before Ben did. His rumble faded. His ears stayed upright, but the tension in his chest eased by a fraction. Maggie saw it. So did Isaiah. Something old passed between them, a language built from silence, breath, and discipline. Isaiah took a slow step forward. His boots sank into the mud with a soft pull. "Easy," he murmured. "I am not here to take your post." The dog blinked once. Rain tapped harder on the tin roof, drumming over the shelter yard. Isaiah crouched several feet from the cage, lowering himself until his eyes were level with the K9's. He did not smile. He did not reach through the wire. He only waited. That patience changed the air. Ben lowered the cutters completely. Maggie found herself breathing slower, as if Isaiah's stillness had made a shelter full of frightened animals quieter by force of grace alone. "What is your name, boy?" Isaiah asked. The K9's tag swung faintly when he shifted, but the letters remained hidden beneath grime. Isaiah glanced at Maggie. "Do you have warm towels inside?" "Yes." "He will need water first. Not too much. Small amounts. And no crowding him." Maggie nodded and turned toward Ben. "Go get the intake kit, towels, and the shallow bowl." Ben hurried away. Isaiah remained where he was, rain darkening his sleeves. The K9 stared back at him, and in that stare there was something almost unbearable. Not pleading. Not yet. A waiting so old it had hardened into duty. Maggie swallowed. "The county has been pressuring us all month. We are over capacity. The back wing is supposed to be cleared by tomorrow morning. A developer bought the neighboring lots. He says this part of the property is a hazard." Isaiah's eyes did not leave the dog. A dog gets locked in a condemned run the night before inspection. Maggie's face tightened. "That is what I was thinking." A pickup door slammed near the front lot. Then another set of footsteps approached, brisk and annoyed, splashing through gravel. A man in a dark raincoat rounded the corner, holding an umbrella low over silver hair combed too perfectly for midnight. Dale Whitmore did not look at the dog first. He looked at the broken boards, the rusted cages, the mud, the people standing where he did not want witnesses. "What exactly is going on back here?" he asked. Maggie stiffened. "Mr. Whitmore, this is private shelter property." He gave a thin smile. "Property under review." I saw lights from the road. His eyes finally landed on the cage, and for 1 second his expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition, quickly buried. Isaiah noticed. The white canine noticed too. He rose from his seated position, slow and silent, placing himself in front of the backpack again. Dale took half a step back, then covered it by adjusting his umbrella. "That animal cannot stay here," he said. "This is precisely the kind of liability the county warned about." Maggie's cheeks flushed. He was locked in an abandoned run. "Then call animal control." Isaiah stood. The movement was unhurried, but it changed the size of the night. He was not loud. He did not need to be. "Nobody is taking him anywhere until we know who put him there." Dale's smile thinned. "And you are?" "Staff Sergeant Isaiah Brooks, United States Marine Corps." The words landed quietly, but even the rain seemed to make room for them. Dale glanced at the dog, then at the bag behind him. "This is a shelter matter." "Sergeant." Isaiah stepped just enough to block Dale's view of the cage. "Then let the shelter handle it." Ben returned with towels and a bowl, slowing when he felt the tension. Maggie took the water from him and set it near the cage door. Isaiah crouched again, picked up the bowl, and slid it carefully through the gap at the bottom of the fencing, stopping far short of the backpack. The K9 watched his hand. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the dog lowered his head and drank, small measured laps, never taking his eyes fully off Isaiah. Maggie's eyes shone, though she would not let the tears fall. Dale exhaled sharply. "You people are making a mistake." Isaiah looked at the lock, then at the tag beneath the dog's throat. "Maybe," he said, "but it will not be the first one made here tonight." The K9 finished drinking and stepped closer to the fence. Close enough now that Isaiah could see a smear of mud across the tag, and beneath it, the faint edge of a letter. The dog bowed his head 1 inch. Not submission. Permission. Isaiah reached slowly through the wire, 2 fingers touching the cold metal for the first time. The tag trembled against his hand, and somewhere inside him, a door he had kept shut for years began to open. Isaiah's fingers closed gently around the tag, and the cold of it ran through him faster than the rain. The metal was thin, scratched, and caked with years of mud, the kind of grime that did not come from one bad night, but from seasons of being dragged through wet grass, storage dust, and places no one wanted remembered. He did not pull. He let the dog feel the weight of his hand first. The white K9 stood still, so close to the fence now that Isaiah could hear the rough edge in his breathing. Not panic, not anger. Exhaustion held together by training. Maggie lifted the flashlight higher, its beam settling over Isaiah's hand. "Can you read it?" she asked. "Not yet." His voice was quieter than before. Dale Whitmore shifted behind them, the tip of his umbrella tapping once against the concrete. "This is unnecessary. The county can identify him in the morning." The dog's eyes moved to Dale, and the air seemed to tighten. Isaiah did not look back. "Mr. Whitmore, if you take one more step toward this kennel, I will ask you to wait by the front office." There was no threat in the sentence. That made it heavier. Dale stopped moving. Isaiah took the corner of the towel Maggie offered and dampened it with rainwater from the bowl. Slowly, with 2 fingers, he rubbed the surface of the tag. A smear of brown slid away. Then another. The first letters appeared under the flashlight, faint but clear enough to make the muscles in Isaiah's face change. "In Hayes." His hand stilled. Maggie saw the blood leave his expression. "Sergeant." Isaiah did not answer. The rain hammered harder, but for him the storm had fallen away. He was no longer behind an animal shelter in Virginia. He was standing in another wet place years ago, under a gray morning sky, hearing Corporal Nathan Hayes laugh as a white shepherd puppy tripped over his own oversized paws in the training yard. Nathan had been 28 then, all quick jokes and steady hands, the kind of man who could calm a scared dog, a nervous recruit, or a room full of grieving strangers without raising his voice. He used to say that animals knew the truth before people admitted it. Isaiah had not thought about that voice in years without feeling something inside him lock shut. Maggie whispered, "Do you know that name?" Isaiah blinked once, returning to the rain, the cage, the trembling dog. He rubbed the tag again. More letters came into view. United States Marine Corps. K9 Unit. Ghost. The name landed between them like a match struck in the dark. The dog's ears lifted when Isaiah breathed it aloud. Ghost. The canine's body changed. His shoulders lowered by the smallest measure, and his tail, still heavy with rain, gave one slow movement before becoming still again. Maggie covered her mouth. Ben looked from Isaiah to the dog. That is his name? Isaiah nodded, but the movement seemed to cost him. It was. He swallowed hard. It is. Ghost took one step closer, pressing his wet chest almost against the fencing. Isaiah kept his hand on the tag, thumb resting over the stamped letters. Beneath Ghost's name, smaller words appeared, worn almost smooth by time. Do not leave him behind. Isaiah closed his eyes. He remembered Nathan saying those same words outside a transport truck after a long rescue drill on the Carolina coast. Ghost had been young then, snow-white even under dust, too smart for his own good, always watching Nathan's hands for direction. Nathan had clipped the tag to the dog's collar and grinned at Isaiah. In case he ever gets himself promoted and forgets us. Isaiah had laughed. They all had. Nobody laughed like that after the flood mission. Nobody spoke much at all. Official reports were clean things, made of dates, weather conditions, and phrases that sounded merciful because they left out the parts that woke men at 3 in the morning. The record said Nathan Hayes was lost during evacuation support after a coastal storm overwhelmed a rural relief station. The record said Ghost was presumed lost with him. The record said Isaiah Brooks survived and returned to duty. It did not say that Isaiah had searched until his boots filled with water. It did not say that he had called Ghost's name until his throat burned. It did not say that every medal afterward felt heavier than mercy. Maggie's voice pulled him back. Sergeant Brooks, what happened to him? Isaiah opened his eyes and looked at Ghost, not at the people waiting for an answer. He was my friend's dog. Ghost gave a soft sound then, not a bark, not a whine, something broken and low that seemed to come from far below memory. Isaiah reached his other hand through the wire, palm open. Ghost stared at it. 1 second passed, then another. Finally, the dog lowered his head and pressed his muzzle into Isaiah's palm. Maggie turned away, wiping her cheek quickly with the sleeve of her raincoat. Ben exhaled like he had been holding his breath for minutes. Even Dale said nothing. For a little while, there was only rain and the faint metal sound of the tag against the fence. Then Ghost shifted, pulling back just enough to look at the backpack behind him. His eyes moved from the bag to Isaiah, then back again. It was not random. It was a message. Isaiah knew that look. He had seen working dogs point toward buried scent, hidden supplies, frightened survivors behind. Closed doors. Ghost was not protecting the backpack from them. He was waiting for the right person to open it. Isaiah stood slowly. Maggie, I need the lock opened, but nobody reaches for that bag except me. Ben lifted the bolt cutters, this time waiting for Ghost's reaction. Ghost did not growl. He simply stepped aside, still between the backpack and everyone else, but leaving a narrow path to the door. Dale's face tightened in the flashlight glow. You have no idea what is in there. Isaiah finally turned to him. No, he said, rain running down his face like something older than weather. But Ghost does. The cutters bit into the padlock. Metal snapped. The kennel door swung open with a long, tired groan, and Ghost did not run. He stood in the opening, thin, soaked, and shining white beneath the storm, then lowered his head to the backpack as if presenting evidence to a man who had come back too late, but had come back all the same. Isaiah crouched low, one hand still resting lightly on the damp tag, feeling the cold press through his gloves, and Ghost's amber eyes followed every movement. The backpack was old and soaked, canvas soft from years of rain, edges fraying where the stitches had begun to give way. Isaiah reached forward slowly, his knuckles brushing the wet fabric. Ghost lowered his head, body tense, but he did not move away. Inside the pack were items that whispered of another life. A folded raincoat the color of field mud, a small journal wrapped in a waterproof cover, and a photograph that had faded under water stains. Isaiah pulled out the journal carefully, brushing the mud from the edges. His eyes fell on the first page, and he read the words etched in careful handwriting. For Ghost, should you survive. His chest tightened. Maggie and Ben stood behind him, shoulders wet from rain, the flashlight beam cutting through the mist, illuminating the white fur along the dog's spine. Ghost pressed his chest closer to the cage floor, as if aware of the significance of the discovery, each breath controlled, measured, like a salute he had learned long ago. Isaiah turned the photograph over, revealing an image of Nathan Hayes kneeling in the field, a young white canine beside him, tail high and proud, ears alert, and eyes bright with understanding. Isaiah felt a lump in his throat, the rain dripping into his collar, mixing with the sudden warmth rising in his chest. The dog had known his handler, had lived through months of uncertainty, and here he was, waiting for the right person to finally notice. Isaiah glanced at Ghost and whispered, "You carried this all this time, did you?" The dog's ears flicked, amber eyes softening. Isaiah opened the journal, pages damp but legible, detailing routines, training notes, and observations that spoke of patience, trust, and vigilance. A manual of loyalty written for a dog that had already proven it beyond any need for words. Each sentence seemed to echo in the night, blending with the patter of rain on tin and the occasional splash of water across the shelter yard. Isaiah read of field exercises, search drills, recovery protocols, and subtle notes Nathan had left, a reminder to reward courage, a mark to remember restraint, instructions on reading the heartbeat of both people and animals. Maggie whispered, "This is extraordinary. He was not forgotten, even if we thought he was." Isaiah nodded, eyes still on the pages. Ghost shifted, nudging the backpack closer, a silent command that more was to come. Isaiah reached in again, fingers brushing against a folded envelope secured by a rubber band, damp but intact. Inside, a handwritten note read, "Isaiah, trust Ghost. He knows the path back to us. Time will explain what words cannot." Isaiah's eyes lifted to the dog, and he saw something that made him pause, a deep calm, a focus that spoke of years waiting for recognition, of loyalty maintained in absence, of promises kept without a single word spoken. The rain eased slightly, the air thick with the scent of wet pine and mud, and Isaiah felt the stillness settle over the yard. Ben shifted beside Maggie, uneasy but quiet, sensing the gravity of the moment. Ghost's tail flicked once, deliberate, measured, then stopped. Isaiah finally spoke, voice low, even with the storm around them. "You waited for me, did you, boy?" Ghost pressed his head forward again, and Isaiah felt the small press of wet fur against his fingers, a weight that carried more history than he could measure. The photograph fell from his other hand, landing softly in the mud, and Isaiah did not bend to retrieve it. He did not need to. The image, the journal, the note, the tag, and the dog itself were enough. Silence hung around them, full and complete, punctuated only by the rhythm of the rain and the slow, even breaths of Ghost. Maggie broke it first, whispering, "What happens now?" Isaiah looked at her, then at Ben, and finally down at Ghost. "Now," he said, "we make sure he is safe. We let him decide the next step." The dog blinked once, ears pricked, eyes steady, amber like lanterns in the mist. Then Ghost lifted his head slightly, nudging Isaiah's hand with his nose, guiding him toward the side gate, away from the abandoned wing, toward a space that could be warmed, dried, and watched over. Isaiah rose slowly, mindful of the water in the mud and the exhaustion in his own muscles. Ghost did not run, but walked with him, measured steps, the rhythm of obedience, loyalty, and understanding aligning with the soft splash of boots in the puddles. Maggie and Ben followed at a respectful distance, each step careful not to disturb the bond forming in real time. The storm began to lessen, rain falling lighter, mist curling around the edges of the chain-link fence. Isaiah glanced back once, flashlight catching on the white fur glinting wetly, and knew that this was not just recovery for a dog. This was recognition, understanding, and the beginning of a journey that had been waiting years to resume. Ghost walked beside him, silent, proud, and patient, carrying the weight of memories and promises as if nothing in the years between had ever existed. Inside the intake room, warmth rose from an old wall heater with a tired hum, carrying the clean smell of cotton towels, disinfectant, and dry kibble. Ghost stood just past the doorway, water dripping from his white coat onto the rubber mat, his paws placed neatly beneath him as if he had been ordered to wait. Maggie wanted to wrap him in every blanket they owned, but Isaiah lifted one hand gently, and she understood. Some animals needed comfort given like a whisper, not thrown over them like a net. Isaiah knelt 6 feet away and set the backpack on a metal exam table, careful to keep it within Ghost's sight. The dog watched it first, then Isaiah, then the door, always counting the room, always measuring exits, always doing a job no one had officially given him anymore. Ben returned with a shallow bowl of water and a small plate of soft food, moving slowly now, changed by what he had seen outside. "I called Dr. Hannah Reed," Maggie said, her voice low. "She lives 12 minutes out. She said she is coming." Isaiah nodded. His eyes remained on Ghost. "Good. He needs a medical check before anything else." Ghost heard his name without hearing it spoken. His ears twitched toward Isaiah, then settled again. The dog's coat looked almost silver under the fluorescent light, but beneath the mud and rain, Isaiah could see signs of long hardship. Burrs caught deep in the fur around his legs, old pressure marks where the collar had sat too tightly, a thinness through the ribs that no proud posture could hide. Still, Ghost did not collapse. He did not beg. He stood guarding the backpack as if Nathan Hayes himself might walk through the door at any moment and ask for it back. Isaiah opened the journal again with both hands, careful not to tear the damp pages. Maggie stood nearby, but did not lean over him. The last pages were written in shorter lines, less like training notes, and more like a man recording what mattered when time was running out. There were names, dates, mile markers, references to supply deliveries after the hurricane season 3 years before. Isaiah frowned as he read, the words fitting themselves against memories he had tried to leave buried. A relief station near the coast. Civilian contractors. Missing crates meant for displaced families. Nathan had been quiet that week, quieter than usual, always checking manifests, always asking why certain trucks left after dark. Isaiah remembered telling him to get some sleep. Nathan had smiled and said, after Ghost stopped staring at the same 3 men. Back then, Isaiah thought it was just a joke. Now the room felt colder. He turned another page. A folded map slipped out and landed against his boot. Ghost stepped forward immediately, not aggressive, just alert, his nose lowering toward the map. Isaiah picked it up and spread it across the floor where the dog could see. It showed Cedar Run County, the old shelter property, the abandoned service road behind it, and a small circle marked in black ink less than half a mile from where they stood. Maggie stared down at it. That is the drainage culvert behind the backfield. Ben swallowed. Nobody goes out there anymore. The county fenced it after the flood washed part of the road out. Isaiah looked at Ghost. The dog was no longer staring at the backpack. His gaze was fixed on the map, body still, breathing shallow, eyes bright with recognition. Isaiah had seen that look in trained dogs before. Scent memory. Location memory. A place carved into the body because the mind never let it go. Before anyone could speak, the front door buzzer sounded through the hall. Maggie flinched. At that hour, the sound felt wrong. Ben walked to the small window beside the office and peered through the blinds. "It is Mr. Whitmore again," he said. "And someone else with him." Isaiah closed the journal. Maggie's face tightened. "I told him to leave." The buzzer sounded again, longer this time. Ghost moved between the intake room and the hall, silent as a shadow, his wet paws leaving pale prints on the floor. Isaiah stood and slipped the journal back into the backpack, but he kept the folded map in his hand. "Do not open the door yet." Maggie nodded. Through the wall came Dale Whitmore's voice, muffled by glass but sharp with impatience. "Miss Turner, this animal is a legal liability. I have contacted the county inspector. That back wing has to be cleared." The other man said something too low to hear. Ghost's ears angled forward. A low sound moved in his chest. Not fear, not fury, but warning. Isaiah stepped into the hallway and looked through the blinds. Dale stood under the awning with his umbrella tucked under one arm. Beside him was a man in a navy rain jacket, his face turned away from the light, one hand holding a phone, the other resting near a leather folder. There was something official about him, but not calm. Isaiah watched Ghost watching them. The dog was not reacting to Dale anymore. He was reacting to the other man. Maggie whispered, "What is it?" Isaiah looked down at the map, then at the backpack, then at the white K9 standing in front of the hallway like a living door. "Ghost knows him." The words settled hard. Outside, Dale knocked this time, 3 polite taps that sounded almost rehearsed. "Miss Turner, open the door. We can settle this quickly." Ghost stepped backward until his shoulder brushed Isaiah's leg. Not hiding, guiding. Then he turned his head toward the rear exit, toward the dark field beyond the shelter, toward the little black circle on Nathan's map. Isaiah understood with a certainty that did not need proof. The answer was not at the front door. It was outside, in the rain, where Ghost had been trying to lead them all along. He bent close to the dog's ear and whispered, "Show me." Ghost lifted his head, and for the first time since the cage opened, something like purpose returned fully to his body. The tiredness was still there, the hunger, the years. But beneath it, stronger than all of them, was the old command Nathan had trusted him with. Find the truth. Isaiah looked at Maggie. Keep them at the front. Give me 10 minutes. Maggie's eyes widened, but she did not argue. She had heard the voice of a Marine before, the kind that did not ask because it was already carrying the weight of the choice. Ben handed Isaiah a flashlight and an old shelter raincoat. Isaiah took both, then opened the rear exit. Cold air rushed in. Ghost stepped out first, white fur catching the security light, tag glinting once against his chest. Then he moved into the darkness with slow, certain steps, not like a lost dog leaving shelter, but like a witness returning to the place where silence had kept its secret too long. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle as Isaiah followed Ghost across the muddy field behind the shelter. The night smelled of wet pine, cold earth, and the faint tang of metal from the old chain-link fences. Ghost moved with purpose, paws sinking slightly into puddles, the white fur streaked with mud but shining faintly under the dim security lights. Isaiah's boots squelched in rhythm with the dog's steps. He kept the flashlight angled toward the ground, careful not to startle him, but he did not need to worry. Ghost had led teams in far worse conditions, and tonight he moved with the patience of a soldier waiting for orders that had been delayed for years. Maggie stayed behind at the shelter entrance with Ben, keeping Dale Whitmore and the second man occupied near the front office. Isaiah did not glance back. The wind had softened, carrying the faint hum of insects, the distant sound of highway tires on wet asphalt, and the whisper of moving water in the culvert ahead. Ghost paused at a rusted gate partially hidden in tall grass, lifted his nose, and inhaled slowly. Isaiah crouched slightly, watching the dog's chest rise and fall with controlled effort, amber eyes reflecting intelligence and memory. Then Ghost shifted direction slightly, nudging Isaiah gently with his side, guiding him toward a small indentation in the bank that the rainwater had not yet filled. Isaiah knelt, brushing branches aside to reveal the entrance. A shallow concrete opening led into a narrow drainage channel beneath the field, a forgotten passage blocked by debris years ago. Ghost did not hesitate. He stepped down first, tail low but steady, and Isaiah followed, keeping low to maintain the dog's trust. Water trickled around their boots as they moved carefully, the walls of the culvert rough and damp, faint moss glimmering in the flashlight beam. Isaiah could feel Ghost's focus in every muscle, the measured pressure of paws against his legs, as if ensuring he stayed close and aware. The white K9 led him a short distance before pausing, nudging a small metal latch concealed under a broken wooden plank. Isaiah knelt, noticing how Ghost had preserved this spot, a sentinel keeping the secret intact. With a gentle push, the plank moved, revealing a small compartment beneath the earth, dry and secure despite the rain above. Inside lay several waterproof boxes, envelopes, and a folded piece of canvas. Isaiah lifted the first box. Inside were photographs, letters, and training notes meticulously kept. The images showed Nathan Hayes kneeling beside Ghost during exercises, both alert, focused, and in harmony. Isaiah felt a lump in his throat, the years of guilt and loss pressing down as if time had condensed all of it into this single moment. Ghost sat beside him, ears tilted, eyes tracking every movement, as if confirming that Isaiah could be trusted with what he was about to see. The letters told a story Isaiah had only half remembered, the careful documentation of field missions, rescue operations, and the small acts of care Nathan had noted for Ghost, for people, for any life that depended on precision and attention. Isaiah carefully unfolded the canvas. Inside was a journal wrapped around several small dog tags, each stamped with dates, names, and unit designations. One tag had been bent and weathered, likely from long use in rough terrain. Isaiah lifted it and saw Ghost's name embossed clearly, Ghost. Beneath it, Nathan's own initials, and a short phrase. Never leave him behind. Isaiah exhaled slowly, rain dripping off his cap into his collar, and for the first time felt a measure of peace he had not known since the day Nathan disappeared. Ghost nudged the journal toward him, amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Isaiah opened it, reading Nathan's meticulous notes on every exercise, every response, every command given to Ghost, and then a series of observations about human interactions, patience, and loyalty. Isaiah looked down at the dog, pressing a hand lightly against the damp fur, and whispered, "You kept the promise." Ghost leaned into him slightly, nose brushing the pad of Isaiah's hand. Outside the culvert, the night continued with soft rain pattering against the field and shelter, but inside the channel, there was only silence, understanding, and the steady breath of a dog who had waited for the right moment and the right person. Isaiah slid the boxes into his pack, careful not to disturb Ghost's careful positioning, then turned back toward the lighted exit. Ghost moved ahead, leading him out slowly, deliberately, making sure he stayed connected every step. Once above ground, Isaiah felt the damp air hit his face, smelled the shelter, the wet grass, and something faint and sweet, the smell of pine and trust. He exhaled, lowering the map, the boxes, the tag, and finally looked down at Ghost. The dog sat again, calm now, eyes scanning the horizon, alert but assured. Isaiah nodded. "You did it," he said quietly. Ghost gave a small movement, tail flicking slightly, acknowledging the words without sound. For the first time since he had found him, Isaiah felt the weight of lost years lift, carried by pause and persistence, by a white coat and a memory that had not faded. The storm had not ended, but the night felt lighter, filled with purpose, patience, and the quiet redemption of what had been kept safe for too long. Ghost led Isaiah through the thin mist of early morning, his paws sinking into the damp soil along the edge of the shelter field, eyes constantly scanning and adjusting to the shadows, ears twitching at every distant sound, and tail held low but controlled. Isaiah followed closely, keeping his steps measured, careful not to startle him, breathing in the scent of wet grass, pine, and the faint earthy aroma from the drainage channel they had just emerged from. The field stretched ahead, faint outlines of old service roads visible under the soft light of a rising sun that had yet to burn away the mist. Isaiah unrolled the map, spreading it across a low fence post for a moment, comparing the marks Nathan had made years before with the terrain in front of them. Ghost shifted his weight, nudging Isaiah gently toward a small cluster of trees that hid the path leading to the location marked in ink. Isaiah followed, feeling the weight of the journal and waterproof boxes slung in his pack, the metal tag against his glove reminding him of the journey that had led them here. Birds stirred in the trees, their calls brief and tentative against the whisper of wind through wet branches. Ghost paused at the base of a gnarled oak, sniffing the ground carefully, ears upright, then turned slightly to make sure Isaiah had noticed a narrow opening in the underbrush, almost invisible if not for the white coat of the K9 standing sentinel. Isaiah knelt, brushing aside low branches and leaves, revealing a shallow depression in the earth, partially concealed by roots and moss. Ghost entered first, body low, cautious but confident, sniffing at the edges of the small clearing. Isaiah followed, knees damp, boots muddy, flashlight angled toward the ground so as not to blind the dog. In the center lay a small, weathered box, green and scratched, corners dented from years of exposure to the elements, but sealed with a clasp that had resisted rust. Ghost sat beside it, tail flicking once, eyes fixed on Isaiah with an intensity that suggested the importance of the moment was understood on both sides without words. Isaiah knelt, reaching slowly for the clasp, feeling the slight resistance, then sliding it open with care. Inside were more items preserved in plastic sheeting. Photographs of Nathan with Ghost during training drills, field notes detailing missions and observations, a compass, a whistle, and an envelope marked with Isaiah's initials in Nathan's careful handwriting. Isaiah felt the breath leave him, rain from the mist wetting the collar of his jacket, a lump rising in his throat as he recognized the meticulous care Nathan had taken to protect these items, to preserve a history that had been almost lost. Ghost nudged the envelope with his nose, careful and deliberate, as if urging Isaiah to take it. Isaiah lifted it, hands trembling, and unfolded the paper inside. The handwriting was precise, the ink slightly smudged from damp air, words chosen carefully. Isaiah, trust Ghost. He remembers what must not be forgotten. Follow him, and you will understand. Isaiah's gaze shifted from the note to Ghost. The dog's ears flicked, his body tense yet controlled, eyes bright with awareness and recognition. Isaiah exhaled slowly, the rain light glimmering off the dog's wet fur. Feeling the weight of lost years ease just slightly, with the understanding that Nathan's trust had never been misplaced. The clearing was quiet except for the faint rustle of leaves and the gentle drip of residual rain from branches. Isaiah took the compass from the box, checking the bearing Nathan had indicated in the field notes, and then looked back at Ghost, whose body radiated calm authority. Despite the damp and chill, Isaiah whispered, "Lead the way, boy." Ghost rose, stepping toward the narrow path beyond the clearing, and Isaiah followed, careful to mirror each movement, aware that every step was a continuation of a journey begun years earlier. The mist began to lift with the rising sun, revealing subtle contours in the terrain that matched Nathan's map exactly, confirming what Isaiah already felt. Ghost was guiding him not randomly, but with purpose, precision, and the memory of a bond that transcended time and distance. Isaiah breathed deeply, the early morning air carrying the sense of pine, wet earth, and something older, something sacred in the quiet partnership of man and dog. And for the first time in years, he felt the certainty that they were not lost, that Ghost had waited for the right person, the right moment, and that the path forward, though shadowed, was illuminated by trust, memory, and the quiet loyalty of a white canine who had never forgotten. By the time Isaiah and Ghost returned to Cedar Run Animal Shelter, the rain had stopped, and the first pale light of morning had turned every puddle in the back lot into a piece of broken sky. The world looked washed, but not clean yet. Maggie stood near the rear door with her arms folded tight across her chest, her hair damp, her face tired, and her eyes searching Isaiah before she looked down at Ghost. Ben was beside her, holding a towel he had forgotten to use, as if the night had taken the strength from even simple gestures. At the front of the building, Dale Whitmore's black sport utility vehicle was still parked under the security light, but the man himself was gone. So was the stranger in the navy rain jacket. Their absence felt louder than their knocking had. Ghost noticed it too. He stopped before entering the shelter, lifted his nose, and took in the morning air with slow, careful breaths. Isaiah watched him, then looked toward the office window where the blinds still trembled from the air conditioner. They left. Maggie nodded. "A few minutes after you went out." Dale said he would be back with paperwork. Her voice carried anger, but beneath it lived fear. He kept asking whether we had touched the dog's belongings. Isaiah set Nathan's weathered box on the intake table, then placed the journal, tags, map, and sealed envelopes beside it with the care of a man laying out evidence at a memorial. "Then he already knows what this is." Maggie looked at the items, and something in her face changed. The story was no longer about a stray in a locked kennel. It was about someone who had been hidden because he had remembered too much. Dr. Hannah Reed arrived just after sunrise in a faded blue veterinary truck, her hair pulled into a loose knot, her jacket thrown over scrubs, her eyes sharp despite the early hour. She examined Ghost first, not the papers, not the mystery, not the fear in the room. She moved slowly, speaking to him as if every word had weight. "Hello, handsome. You have had a long watch, have you not?" Ghost allowed her close only after Isaiah rested one hand on his shoulder. Hannah checked his eyes, his paws, his ribs, the collar marks under his thick white fur. Her voice softened. "He is dehydrated, underfed, exhausted, but his heart is strong." Isaiah looked down at Ghost. It always was. Hannah did not ask why his voice broke on the last word. She only wrapped a towel around the dog's shoulders and let silence do its work. By 8 o'clock, Maggie had called the sheriff's office, the county veterans liaison, and a retired military investigator Isaiah still trusted. Nobody shouted. Nobody rushed. The truth did not arrive like thunder. It arrived in copies, phone calls, serial numbers, old dates, and Nathan Hayes's careful handwriting. The boxes from the culvert contained records of relief supplies that had never reached families after the coastal flooding 3 years earlier. The photographs showed storage locations. The notes named contractors. The sealed envelope contained a small drive in a waterproof case, still dry, still waiting. Hannah used the shelter office computer to open it while Ghost lay under the desk with his head on Isaiah's boot, eyes half closed but ears awake. The screen flickered once, then a video appeared. Nathan Hayes sat in the dim cab of a parked truck, younger than Isaiah, remembered him, and more tired than Isaiah wanted him to be. Ghost's white head was visible beside his knee. Nathan did not look afraid. He looked resolved. His voice came through soft and steady, touched by static but unmistakable. If this gets found, it means Ghost did his job better than any of us deserved. Isaiah stopped breathing. Nathan looked down at the dog in the video, then back toward the camera. Brooks, if you are the one watching this, listen to me. You did not leave me. You followed orders. You saved who you could. Do not spend your life standing in the place where the storm took us. The room blurred around Isaiah. Maggie turned away, wiping her face. Ben lowered his head. Hannah put one hand over her mouth. Ghost lifted his eyes from the floor, hearing the voice he had carried in memory for years. On the screen, Nathan smiled faintly, and that small kindness hurt more than any grief. Take care of him, brother. He will try to look brave. Do not let him do it alone. The video ended without music, without ceremony, without a final salute. Just a frozen frame of Nathan's hand resting on Ghost's head. Isaiah stood motionless, one hand pressed against the edge of the desk, the other touching the old tag in his palm. Then he knelt beside Ghost. The dog rose before Isaiah could call him, moving close enough that his damp white fur brushed the Marine's jacket. Isaiah lowered his forehead to Ghost's. I am sorry, he whispered. I thought I lost you both. Ghost answered the only way he knew. He leaned his full weight into him. By noon, deputies had taken the records. Dale Whitmore's development review was suspended. The old shelter wing was sealed, not for demolition, but for investigation. No one celebrated. It did not feel like victory yet. It felt like a door opening in a room that had been dark too long. Outside, sunlight finally broke across the back lot, touching the rusted kennels, the wet gravel, and the place where Ghost had waited behind a locked door. Isaiah walked him out slowly, a clean blanket over the dog's shoulders, Nathan's tag resting beside Ghost's own. Maggie stood near the gate, watching them pass. What happens to him now, she asked. Isaiah looked down. Ghost looked up. For the first time, the dog's eyes were not asking for orders. They were asking whether the waiting was over. Isaiah's voice came quiet, certain, and warm. Now he comes home. Isaiah brought Ghost home just before dusk, when the Virginia sky had softened into a pale orange glow and the streets still smelled of rain drying on asphalt. His house sat at the end of a quiet road outside Cedar Run, a small one-story place with a white porch, a flag folded in a shadow box by the front window, and wind chimes that moved gently whenever the pine trees breathed. For years, the house had been clean, orderly, and silent, the kind of silence a man keeps when he has learned not to ask too much from the night. Ghost stood at the bottom of the porch steps, wearing a clean collar from the shelter and Nathan Hayes's old tag beside his own, both pieces of metal catching the last light. He did not rush inside. He looked at the door, then at Isaiah, then at the yard, studying every corner the way trained dogs study a new post. Isaiah waited with one hand on the railing. No hurry, he said. You decide. Ghost climbed the steps slowly. One paw, then another. At the threshold, he paused again, nose working through unfamiliar scents, cedar polish, old leather, coffee, folded laundry, the faint trace of gun oil locked away in a cabinet, and something lonelier beneath it all. Isaiah opened the door wider. Ghost stepped inside and crossed the living room without touching a thing. He noticed the couch, the hallway, the kitchen, the narrow table where Isaiah set his keys every day. Then he stopped before the framed photograph on the wall. 3 Marines stood in bright afternoon light, with a white K9 sitting proudly between them. Nathan was in the middle, grinning. Isaiah stood beside him, younger, smiling in a way he had forgotten belonged to him. Ghost lifted his nose toward the frame and gave one soft breath. Not a whine, not a bark, a greeting. Isaiah stood behind him for a long moment, unable to move. Yeah, he whispered. He made it here too. That night, Isaiah made food the way Hannah had instructed, small portions, warm water, patience. Ghost ate slowly, pausing between bites as if waiting for permission each time. When the bowl was empty, He looked almost embarrassed by his own hunger. Isaiah sat on the kitchen floor across from him, legs stretched out, back against the cabinet. "You do not have to earn it anymore," he said. Ghost tilted his head. Outside, the first stars appeared beyond the window, and somewhere down the road, a truck passed and faded into distance. Isaiah had placed a thick dog bed near the hallway, with a folded blanket from Cedar Run and a small towel that still smelled faintly of shelter soap. Ghost sniffed it, circled once, then walked away. He moved to the bedroom doorway and lay down across it, his body positioned between Isaiah and the dark hall. Guarding. Still working. Isaiah stood in the room, looking down at him. "Ghost," he said gently, "you are off duty." The dog did not move. His amber eyes stayed open, steady and calm. Isaiah understood then that some promises do not end because the danger is gone. Some promises become the shape of love. So he took an old pair of marine boots from the closet, the pair he had not worn since leaving active service, and set them beside the bed. Ghost rose, walked to them, lowered himself with a tired sigh, and rested his chin across the worn leather. The tag at his neck gave one quiet sound. Isaiah turned out the lamp. For the first time in years, darkness did not feel like something waiting to take him back. It felt like a room being watched over by breath, warmth, and trust. Sleep came slowly, then deeply. No storm, no shouted orders, no empty field where he could not find his friend. Only the soft rhythm of Ghost breathing at the foot of the bed, and the small mercy of a home no longer holding its sorrow alone. Weeks passed, and Cedar Run changed in ways no one expected. The old back wing was repaired instead of demolished. Volunteers came with lumber, paint, gravel, and quiet hands. The county investigation moved forward without noise, and Dale Whitmore's name disappeared from every sign posted near the property. Maggie hung a new wooden board above the restored yard, carved by a retired carpenter who refused payment. Nathan Hayes Memorial K-9. Yard. The morning they unveiled it, Isaiah stood beside Maggie, Hannah, Ben, and a small group of veterans who had heard the story and come without needing an invitation. Ghost sat at Isaiah's left side, coat brushed clean, white fur bright in the sun, posture proud but peaceful. When the cloth came down from the sign, nobody cheered at first. The silence was too full. Then Maggie placed one hand over her heart, and Hannah wiped her eyes, and Isaiah felt Ghost lean gently against his leg. It was not grief leaving. Grief does not leave that easily. It was grief learning where to rest. Later, when the others drifted away, Isaiah walked Ghost to the far end of the yard where the first cage had stood. The rusted run was gone now. In its place was a small patch of fresh grass and a young dogwood tree, its branches thin but reaching. Isaiah knelt and clipped Nathan's old tag to a small metal ring beneath the tree, where it could move in the wind but never be lost again. Ghost watched the tag sway, then pressed his nose once to Isaiah's hand. The evening light fell across them, warm and golden, turning Ghost's white coat almost luminous. Isaiah closed his eyes, and this time when he thought of Nathan, he did not hear the storm. He heard laughter in a training yard, paws on packed dirt, a friend saying, "Do not let him disappear." Isaiah opened his eyes and looked at the dog beside him. "I did not," he whispered. Ghost leaned into him, steady as prayer. Some stories do not end with medals, headlines, or loud justice. Some end with a locked door finally opened, a name finally spoken, and two wounded souls learning that home is not always where